We'll just begin by chanting a prayer that Srila Prabhupada very often used to chant before giving class, Jaya Radha Madhava. Does everyone know this song? Or should I can put it on the screen as well. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I see some new faces today. Thank you so much for being here. You know, there's so many places one can be on a Sunday, but you'll have chosen to come to the temple. Thank you so much. I'll just project Jaya Radha Madhava so you can sing along as well. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So yes, thank you once again for coming here. Today we're going to be discussing on the Krishna book. And so, I'd like to request the blessings of everyone that something beneficial may be said today. And just for those who are not familiar, has everyone heard of the Krishna book? Or is anyone unfamiliar with the Krishna book? I'll just give a very quick overview of what it is. So the Krishna book is given to us by our founder, Srila Prabhupada. It's a very special book. It's a summary of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, the Srimad Bhagavatam is known as Amala Purana, the spotless Purana, because it is completely perfect in all the wisdom it contains, and it's meant exclusively to develop love for God. It completely doesn't care about anything other than developing our love for God. Now, obviously, it caters for everyone. It's not like it's only for high people. It's meant for anyone who wants to develop love for God, anyone who wants to see a revolution in society, actually. It's said that Srimad Bhagavatam will bring about a spiritual and cultural revolution in society. And the 10th canto is a very special part of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which deals with Krishna's pastimes. Now, we meant to read it in order, so you go through the first 9 cantos, and then after gaining all that wisdom, we'll be able to appreciate Krishna's pastimes in the 10th canto. But Srila Prabhupada made it so accessible to us that he summarized it and gave us in the Krishna book so that we could immediately gain some sort of access to that 10th canto of pastimes of Krishna. The 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam is like the face of God, basically. It said, like, you can compare the first cantos to the Lord's feet. The 12th canto is Lord's forehead. So the 10th canto is like the Lord's face. It's like looking in the face of God. That's what you get when you see the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Srila Prabhupada summarized that and gave it to us as the Krishna book. So today's chapter is very much close to the end of the Krishna book. It's chapter 87. It's entitled Prayers by the Personified Vedas. And, I think, I'm on the wrong screen now. So just to start, before, this chapter is quite an amazing chapter, it really is. Just to start off with some statistics, I know this is not the normal way to have a class, you start off with some statistics, but these are just some things that I found very interesting that really, really struck me. Because, well, one thing, when I was asked to give this class on chapter 87, and I had a quick look at it and I saw this is a tremendously long chapter. And then I asked, are we supposed to cover this whole chapter in one day? Because I've got a recording of Prabhupada speaking this chapter, and him just speaking, dictating this chapter takes 2 hours, over 2 hours. And then so we decided to split this over multiple classes because it's really quite an amazing chapter. I just did some quick statistics. It's got 50 verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the chapter 87, but Prabhupada has dedicated 30,000 words in Krishna book to this chapter. Now, if you just do a quick analysis of the number of words per verse, it's over 600. That's like saying for every verse in that chapter, Srila Prabhupada's written a 600-word essay you could think of. And that's by far the next highest chapter is 175 words per verse. And the average in the book is 84. So I don't know if we can necessarily say that this is a more important chapter or something like that. But one thing is clear, that Srila Prabhupada had a lot to say about this chapter. So, yeah, that's just some context of this chapter 87. And basically it starts with this question. This question gives rise to the whole chapter. And this is directly from the book. I'll just read it. King Parikshit inquired from Sukadev Goswami about a very important topic in understanding transcendental subject matter. His question was, since Vedic knowledge generally deals with the subject matter of the 3 qualities of the material world, how then can it approach the subject matter of transcendence, which is beyond the approach of the 3 material modes? Since the mind is material and the vibration of words is a material sound, how can the Vedic knowledge, expressing by material sound the thoughts of the material mind, approach transcendence? So this is quite an important question, and I believe this is one of the reasons why Prabhupada has dedicated so much of time and energy in this chapter. It makes sense. King Parikshit's question is that I'm familiar with the Vedic literature. It's full of material subject matters as well. And we are approaching it with our material mind, with our material senses. How can we approach something transcendental through this platform? And so, I could just read this part, but I think it's more fun if we hear Srila Prabhupada saying it, because we actually have that ability. He dictated Krishna book, and so we can actually hear him speak some words as well. And then hopefully it will just embed a bit deeper in our hearts that way. I'll play the clip of Srila Prabhupada speaking, but obviously, the recording in the 1970s wasn't that great, and Srila Prabhupada's accent may be a bit hard to us to understand, so the words will also be projected there.
The purpose of King Parikshit's inquiring about this was to ascertain from Sukadeva Goswami whether Vedas ultimately describe about the absolute truth as impersonalism or personalism, because understanding of the absolute truth progresses on the three features, namely impersonal Brahma, Paramatma, localized in everyone's heart, and at last the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. The Vedas comprises in three departmental activities. One, it is called the Karma Kanda, or activities under Vedic injunction which gradually purifies one to understand his real position. Then the next is Jnana Kanda, process of understanding the absolute truth by speculative method. And three, Upasana Kanda, or performances of worshipment to Supreme Personality of Godhead, and sometimes to the demigods also. The worshipment of the demigods commanded in the Vedas and the supreme relationship of the personality.
So the first thing that Prabhupada is mentioning here is he's giving us a little bit more detail about why Parikshit Maharaj asked this question in the first place. So he's saying that Parikshit Maharaj is asking this question to ascertain whether the Vedas ultimately describe the absolute truth as impersonal or personal. And it doesn't seem obvious at first, but you'll see as we go along, it'll make sense. And then he gives the three phases in which we understand the absolute truth, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And the Vedas deal with three types of activities: Karma Kanda, Jnana Kanda, and Upasana Kanda. And he's saying here, and he dedicates a few paragraphs to this actually, about the Upasana Kanda. It refers to worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and sometimes the demigods also are included in this. And he gives reasons why. Basically, it's very unlikely that people are just like, come up to you on the street and say, I want to develop pure love of Godhead. I have no other interest in my life. It's very rare to come across such a situation. Generally, all of us, have some sort of desires other than developing pure love of God. We have a desire to, have enough food on the table, have a desire for, various enjoyments in this world. And so that's why the Vedic literature provides some sort of methods and rituals that can be performed where you worship the demigods and you get some material temporary benefits. It's basically like to entice someone to start worshipping someone, and then eventually, hopefully you get purified and you start worshipping God himself and not one of the God's administrators. Just to give a little bit of background of the demigods. So, the philosophy given is that there's only one supreme personality of Godhead, and that's the main name of him is Krishna. But he's also known by many names, including Christ, Allah, or Ram. These are all forms of the supreme personality of Godhead, Krishna. There's also demigods, like, for example, Indra. There's so many demigods. Lord Brahma, even someone as powerful as Lord Brahma is technically a demigod. And these demigods are great personalities. They've been empowered by Krishna to take care of the material universe. And so we give them all respect, but we should not worship them independently as God. And Srila Prabhupada elaborates on that in the chapter, and I just got this bit from Bhagavad Gita 9:23, where Srila Prabhupada, the translation is, "Those who are devotees of other gods and who worship them with faith actually worship only me, O son of Kunti, but they do so in a wrong way." And then in the purport, it's mentioned, "Everyone is to offer his worship to the Supreme Lord only. That will automatically satisfy the different officers and directors of the Lord. The officers and directors are engaged as representatives of the government, and to offer some bribe to the officers and directors is illegal." So here Srila Prabhupada is comparing how a government functions with, Krishna's administration. So Krishna, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he doesn't need to personally manage all the affairs of the material universe. He has empowered various representatives to do all that, including himself expanding eventually as Mahavishnu, who's in charge of maintenance of the whole universe. But he has empowered various demigods to take charge of the whole material affairs. Just like how a president of a country doesn't personally, come and sweep the streets. The president of the country doesn't go out in a police uniform fighting crime. They've got their representatives to do all that. And in the same way, for us, basically we pay taxes and stuff. And okay, I'm not going to talk about corruption and things. We won't get into the real world affairs fully, but the idea is that the citizens are paying a tax, and then the government will use that, to provide the services for the citizens. Now, the taxman or any sort of officer in the government, you cannot go and pay your taxes to him, or that's called a bribe. We're not supposed to bribe the various government officials. Our money, our worship, needs to go directly to the government. So, in that same way, the idea is not to actually worship the demigods. The idea is to worship the Supreme Lord, and automatically all the demigods are naturally worshipped by doing that, because they are his representatives. In fact, they're his parts and parcels, just like how we are his parts and parcels. We're part of God. Another example that's often given is the tree and the roots. So when you water the root of a tree, automatically all the parts of the tree get watered. The leaves, the branches, everything is taken care of. You cannot go individually and say, I'm watering this leaf now, then I'm watering the next leaf. And, the way to water a tree is water the root. So in the same way, worshipping the Supreme Lord automatically worships all the demigods. All the worship of the demigods are included when we worship the Supreme Lord. We're not supposed to worship the demigods independently. But, as we heard from Prabhupada and the Vedic literature, the demigod worship is given so that people get like a taste for doing worship. And then, gradually they'll progress and start worshipping God. So, we'll hear Prabhupada continue speaking. From the Krishna book.
Answering this question of King Parikshit, Sukadeva Goswami replied that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has created the mind, senses, and living force for the purpose of sense gratification, transmigrating from one kind of body to another, as well as for the purpose of being liberated from the material condition. In other words, the senses, the mind, and living force can be utilized either for sense gratification or for transmigrating from one body to another, or for the matter of liberation.
Okay, so here Prabhupada is saying something quite interesting, that in reference to the same question that was asked, how are we approaching God with our material mind and senses? And then Sukadeva Goswami says something interesting, that the Lord has created the mind and senses and living force of the living entity for the purpose of either sense gratification or transmigration from one kind of body to another, and as well as the purpose of allowing liberation. So later on it's actually described a bit further, and we might not even get there because it's a long chapter. But when we engage our mind and senses, our material mind and senses, when we engage them in service, then it actually becomes purified. We operate with a purified mind and senses. And that same material mind and senses would be absorbed in sense gratification, or basically enjoying things in this material world. But when we engage in devotional service, then that same material mind and senses becomes purified, and that results in our liberation from this world. So that's how we approach transcendence. It's not that because we have a material mind and senses, we can't approach transcendence. We can, by engaging in devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada continues, that I think the curtain's about to open. Jai Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki Jai, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai, Shri Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So, Prabhupada continues speaking.
Another point is that it is clearly stated in the answer of Sukadeva Goswami that the Lord created the mind, senses, and intelligence, a living force. It is not stated there that the living entities are created. Living entities are eternal along with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as much as the shining particles of the rays of the sun are existing always along with the sun. Therefore, there is no question of creation of the rays of the sun, whether the cloud is created by the sun to cover the shining forces of the molecules of sunrise. The conditioned soul, therefore, so long it is within the cloud or material concept of life remains in the darkness of knowledge, and the whole Vedic process is to purify such a condition in the darkness. Ultimately, when the senses and mind of the conditioned soul becomes fully purified and they come to the original position, it is called Krishna consciousness, and that is.
So here Srila Prabhupada is saying something interesting. There's an important point actually raised, that the mind, senses and intelligence are what the Lord created. The living entities themselves were always existing. Just like how the shining particles of the sun rays always exist with the sun. You can't say that the sun was there and then after a while the sun rays started. The sun and the sun rays were always existing eternally together. And in the same way, the living entities and the Supreme Lord have always been existing eternally together. And well, unfortunately, in the case of us who come to this material world, when we come here, we need a material mind and senses with which to enjoy this world. So that is created. But ourselves, we who we are eternally existing together with the Supreme Lord. Just like how, and Prabhupada elaborates, how the sun rays are sometimes covered by a cloud. So in the same way, we are sometimes covered by the darkness of ignorance. But the idea of engaging in devotional service is to remove that cloud covering us and become fully purified and gain our natural, true position of Krishna consciousness. And then the next thing Prabhupada talks about in this chapter quite a bit, and that's why I'm just summarizing now, he's talking about impersonalism and personalism. And if you've read other writings of Srila Prabhupada, I think you understand why this chapter is so voluminous. Because once Prabhupada starts writing about impersonalism and personalism, he really likes to clarify and hammer the point home, and we'll talk a bit more about it later. But at this point he says, he gives some basic examples how the Lord, it's very easy to understand that the Lord is personal ultimately. Because we can see even we have personality. You know, every person here is an individual. We all have our own tastes, our likes, our dislikes. We have our own qualities. We have our own personality. So naturally, wherever we come from must also have personality. You know, it's like if you're in a gold mine, in order to get gold, you have to get it from a gold mine, someplace that has gold. Or anything in this world, you know, you can't say that this thing appeared out of nowhere. Imagine if I told you this chair here, it wasn't there and it just appeared out of nowhere. No, it came from some factory and where they had plastic, that's why they molded it in this way. If they didn't have plastic, they wouldn't be able to make a plastic chair. So in the same way, the fact that we have personality means that whatever gives us, whatever is the source of us, must also have personality. You can't expect, you know, an impersonal effulgence or like an impersonal, you know, glowing object to suddenly give rise to all sorts of people with all various personalities. It doesn't make sense. Like even Prabhupada gives the example of the father and child. Because the father has hands and legs, therefore the child has hands and legs. You know, it's not that a father, a father would be some complete non-entity and then suddenly a child would come out from there with hands and legs and a personality. And there's an interesting word that especially impersonalists like to focus on, which is nirguna, which literally means no qualities. And unfortunately, they've interpreted that to mean that God has no qualities. And really what that word means is no material qualities. So, you know how we have some lesser qualities, lust, anger, greed, and all those sorts of things. Those material qualities are not found in God. Therefore, he's described as nirguna. Of course, he has transcendental versions of those qualities, like God does get angry. But just thinking of how Keshav Maharaj recently was elaborating on spiritual anger on Lord Nrsingadev's appearance day, and he kind of delineated the complete difference between the anger that we often fall victim to and the spiritual anger that the Lord and the pure devotees have. And I encourage everyone to watch that class. You can find it on Facebook. But basically, it's the type of anger where you're not worried about your own benefit. Like, for example, if Ravindra steals my food, I'm going to be angry, but I'm going to be angry just because I'm greedy, I want to eat. But the Lord is not like that. His anger was because his devotee was being harmed. And it was only with the intention of correcting that action and, taking action on that. He didn't have any personal hatred or anger towards Hiranyakashipu. So, yes, so whenever we see this word nirguna, it's meant to mean no material qualities. And I think this will be the last of our Prabhupada clips, also because time is also going. And Prabhupada continues.
Great sages like the four Bharas, headed by Sanak, followed these principles of Vedic knowledge, and how gradually from impersonal understanding they came to the platform of personal worship of the Supreme Lord. It is recommended, therefore, we have to follow the great personalities. Sukadeva Goswami is also one of the great personalities. And the answer given by Sukadeva Goswami on the inquiry of Maharaj Parikshit is authorized. One who follows, therefore, the footsteps of such great personalities purely, very easily walk on the path of liberation, thus ultimately goes back to home, back to Godhead. That is the way of perfection of this human form of life.
So this is quite interesting, and it leads on to the next part, but Prabhupada is saying how we must follow the great personalities, like the four Kumaras, and it's quite an apt choice to choose the four Kumaras because the four Kumaras were initially attached to the impersonal conception of God. But gradually they came to the understanding of the personal worship of the Lord. And another great personality is Sukadeva Goswami. So there's 12 Mahajans given in Srimad Bhagavatam who are like the authorities in devotional service. One of them, well, they count as one, but they're the four Kumaras, and Sukadeva Goswami is another one. And there's a verse that Srila Prabhupada often quotes, Mahajana yena gata sapanta, which means that we must follow in the footsteps of the Mahajans. So, when it comes to philosophy, everyone's got their own philosophy. And there's another verse where, I think Chanakya Pandit, but someone says, you cannot become a great philosopher without challenging another person's philosophy. So, I come up with a philosophy, then, in order for you to become a philosopher, you have to defeat mine, and then we get a whole bunch of various philosophies that come, and then the people in general are bewildered, because who to follow now? If there's so many philosophies, there's so many texts, there's so many books, how do we know what to follow? And the answer is very simple. We must follow in the footsteps of the Mahajans. So those who have come before have set the example for us to follow, and where we can see the end result. Like, for example, with Srila Prabhupada, we can see very, very clearly that he is a special person unlike any other. At the age of 70, to be opening 108 temples around the world, to go on a cargo ship from India to America, have 2 heart attacks along the way. He opens all the temples. He creates over 50 volumes of books, which get translated into so many languages, opens so many farm communities. He's not an ordinary person. So he is a Mahajan for us to follow. And then Prabhupada elaborates on this whole, the importance of the disciplic succession. So the interesting thing that happened was, we know this whole chapter started when Parikshit Maharaj questioned Sukadev Goswami. And then Sukadev Goswami mentions that, this is a wonderful question. One time, Narad Muni asked the same question to Narayan Rishi, Narayan Rishi is the incarnation of God, Narayan, who does austerities, and he's still there doing austerities in Badarik Ashram, for those who have the eyes to see. And then when Narad asked Narayan Rishi the same question about how to approach the transcendence with our material mind and senses, Narayan Rishi said, this is a wonderful question. The same question was asked to the 4 Kumaras in Janaloka. So you can see a lot of the Bhagavatam is like this. Someone asks a question and then they say, your question was asked and by this person. And then that person is like, your question was asked by this person. So you can see very directly the disciplic succession, which is so important. And I suppose nowadays even that could easily happen. You could be like, your friend asks you something and you're like, someone asked the question to Indradyumna Maharaj in the class that thing. And then Indradyumna Maharaj might say, one time I asked Prabhupada that question and he said this. So that same kind of idea is kind of following, the disciplic succession is very alive like this. And yes, that's why another reason why this chapter is so long. Prabhupada likes to emphasize. There's a few themes in this chapter. One about how we shouldn't, demigod worship is just a stepping stone to worshipping the Supreme Lord. And then the importance of personalism versus impersonalism and the disciplic succession are kind of running themes in this chapter. So now we get to the actual prayers by the Vedas, which is what the chapter is entitled. And I'll just read this. Although undergoing the threefold miseries of material existence, the illusioned living entity falsely thinks himself the master of all he surveys. Under the spell of the material energy represented by the threefold material qualities, the living entity is so entangled that he is not at all able to become free unless he is graced by the Supreme Lord. The living entity cannot conquer the influence of the material modes of nature by his own endeavor, but because material nature is working under the control of the Supreme Lord, the Lord is beyond its jurisdiction. So, the irony is, we think we're very powerful. We think we are masters of our situation, but we almost completely helpless in all situations, and we just have this illusion that we're so powerful. Even our ability to speak, our ability to walk, that can just go away at any time. It's not like we've created that ability and we are running it. That's everything in our life is completely dependent on higher authorities. But we are under this illusion that we are masters. But the Supreme Lord is not like that. He is actually the master of everything. Everything is under his control. And these prayers continue where the personified Vedas, and I think it's also important to mention, the Vedas, as you may be, the Vedic literature is the Vedas in a written form. Now here, who is speaking is the Vedas personified, because what we find in Krishna consciousness, it's so personal that even we have information of the personified Vedas. The Vedas are not just a book that you open; they're actual people who are, the keepers of that knowledge or the distributors of that knowledge. So it's actually an important thing for us to remember in this whole topic of impersonalism and personalism. Even the Vedas themselves are people, they're persons. And that's why it's very important to understand. Actually, I'm just realizing this now. This is probably a reason why Srila Prabhupada really focused on impersonalism and personalism in this chapter, because we need to understand that these prayers are being offered by people, by the Vedas personified. And they say that all classes, similar to what was mentioned earlier by Srila Prabhupada, there's quite a bit of repetition in this chapter, that's why I might also be repetitive, that all classes, karma, jnana, yogis, etc., all directed to develop their Krishna consciousness. And only by the grace of the Lord can the living entity understand the exact position of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So this is something, it's so far beyond us to understand, but because by the Lord giving us His mercy, that enables us to understand it. That's the only reason we can understand this. And this is from the book, in our practical life, however, we are attracted by the greatness of a person and not by the greatness of a big mountain. Thus, the term Brahman actually applies to Krishna only. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna concluded that Lord Krishna is the Para Brahman, or the supreme resting place of everything. So Prabhupada gives more information that this is a practical thing. A great person is always more attractive to us than a great object. Like Table Mountain is a great object, it's an amazing feature of this world. But Nelson Mandela is more attractive to people, You might say, hey, they both, like in Cape Town, one place is associated with Nelson Mandela, one place is Table Mountain. Why is Nelson Mandela a bigger attraction than Table Mountain? The answer is obvious. We are attracted more by personality. So in the same way, Krishna, the all-attractive, the most attractive, he has personality that attracts us. And more than that, the conclusion in this chapter, which is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. So Krishna is saying the purpose of the Vedas is to actually know Him. All these personified Vedas, all this Vedic study, if we're not knowing Krishna, then it's not of much use really. The purpose of the Vedas is to get to know and understand Krishna and develop our relationship with Him. And this is coming direct from Himself, because the Vedic literature was authored and compiled by Vyasadeva, who is the literary incarnation of Krishna. His name is Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. So when the author of the Vedic literature is saying the purpose of the Vedic literature is to know Krishna, we should take it seriously. There may be many purposes served in the Vedic literature, like rituals to get, good health and money and other things. But we being told by the authors that the purpose is to get to know Krishna. And then Prabhupada continues in this chapter on a few different points, mentioning that within the body there's 5 different departments of existence: Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya. So the first one is every living entity is food conscious. A child or an animal, or even me, we satisfied only when we're getting nice food. So this is the first stage of consciousness, where the goal is just to eat, and it's called Annamaya. Anna means food. Then the next stage is Pranamaya, or consciousness of one's existence. And then when you're on the mental platform, that consciousness is Manomaya. So, and Prabhupada says the material civilization is primarily in these 3 stages. The first concern is economic development, and then the next concern is defense against being annihilated, and then the next concern is mental speculation or philosophical approaches. And then somehow, when you, for those who are fortunate enough, they reach the 4th stage, which is the intellectual life, that you understand that you're not this material body, but you're a spirit soul. That's the Vijnanamaya stage. And then you come to the understanding that there's a Supreme Lord. I am part and parcel of Him. I am not this body that you see. I'm the soul within this body. And I have a relationship with the Lord. Then when you start acting in that relationship and performing devotional service to develop your relationship with the Lord, then you reach the stage of life called Krishna consciousness, or Anandamaya stage, which is the 5th stage, which is the blissful life of knowledge and eternity, which is what we all striving for. And then, but Sukadeva Goswami recommends for beginners, you can start worshipping the Virat Purush, the gigantic universal form of the Lord. Because before, if you don't understand the deity form of the Lord, or the Lord is a person, you can start off worshipping the Lord in His universal form. And that's why in the Bhagavatam it gives so much information about creation, so that we can see, this universe is so huge, I'm so small. And you develop appreciation that way. And then you can be like, wow, this universe is worthy of worship. I didn't make it. I didn't make the earth. I didn't make all these things that I see around me, but it's this gigantic thing here. The person who made that must be really, really impressive and worthy of our worship. And the same thing we can appreciate in nature, like when we see a flower, when we see the trees, it's like there's such beautiful things that the person who actually made all these must be really, really impressive and worthy of our worship. So it inspires us to just be curious a bit about who that person is. And then Srila Prabhupada, as usual, he mentions the Mayavadi philosopher's thesis that God and the individual soul are one and the same cannot be accepted, because the individual soul has to develop his power according to the development of different types of bodies. The individual soul in the body of a baby cannot show the full power of a grown man. But the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, even when lying on the lap of his mother as a baby, could exhibit his full power by killing Putana and other demons who attacked him. So sometimes the Mayavadis claim that, the individual soul is the same as the Supreme Soul. But then, even the same Mayavadis are not powerful enough to exhibit the supreme potency, whereas Krishna in the form of a baby was killing demons and things. Hare Krishna, yeah. Hare Krishna. Sorry about that. So, the prayers continue. The personified Vedas continue to offer their obeisances. Dear Lord, they prayed, after many, many births, those who have actually become wise take to the worship of your lotus feet in complete knowledge. And then they continue saying, Dear Lord, it is difficult to achieve perfect knowledge of the absolute truth. Your Lordship is so kind to the fallen souls that you appear in different incarnations and execute different activities. So this is another aspect of Krishna's personality, his compassion, that he comes as so many different incarnations and has so many activities and pastimes that he demonstrates just to attract us to him. Like just recently we had Lord Nrsingadev's appearance day, Lord Ram's appearance day. There's so many incarnations of Krishna, more than just the 10 that we are popular. There's actually unlimited incarnations. And this is the Lord's mercy as well. And so this is the part of the chapter where we're going to kind of conclude, and whoever's doing next week's class can continue from. I thought I'll just end by talking a little bit about the invisible impersonalism. We might ask, because maybe we've heard these things before, that we've heard all about how Krishna is a real person. He's not just some sort of impersonal concept or something like that. But it's so important for us to keep on hearing these things, and that's why Prabhupada repeats it, because we also need to start acting in that capacity, acting with that understanding. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu gave a very nice class called The Invisible Impersonalism Within Us. And I encourage everyone to watch it. You can find it on YouTube. And it's really amazing. I'm just going to mention like 1 minute worth of things here. But he was saying how it's not just about having a personal philosophy. It has to be reflective in our behavior as well. And sometimes, some things I've heard is, sometimes, the devotees amongst themselves are so impersonal with each other in their dealings and their relationships. And ironically, impersonalists are sometimes very friendly with, amongst themselves. So our behavior must not be impersonal and mechanical. It needs to be reciprocal. We need to have real relationships with devotees and with everyone. There could be this tendency of categorizing people, because like we mentioned in the same chapter, karmis, jnanis, these are different categories used and described in the chapter. But it doesn't mean that when we see people, we categorize them. Okay, that person's a karmi, that's a jnani, that person's a neophyte devotee, that person's this type. Those categories are not for us to start labeling people, because that is an impersonal thing to do. So we are victims of the impersonalist idea when we start behaving in that way. And then we start doing this thing where we preach personalism impersonally. So it's like, we view people as objects of our preaching. It's like, this is not a real person, this is someone I need to give Krishna consciousness to. I need to force some spiritual life down their throat, That is another form of impersonalism, because we are preaching personalism, but we're doing it impersonally. We're treating people just as objects of our preaching. And that's unfortunately, these things have happened in the past, and they're probably still happening, but these are just some things to be aware of. I think women in ISKCON previously were ill-treated because, they were kind of just seen as objects, and less than people and stuff. So those things unfortunately happened, and so we must always be on guard against things like that. Preaching personalism, but impersonally. So to summarize, the things that were discussed in this chapter and today was, Is the absolute truth personal or impersonal? Demigod worship. The living entities are eternally existing with the Lord. So this was the query about Vedic knowledge. And then Prabhupada emphasized the importance of the disciplic succession and the purpose of the Vedas, which is to know Krishna. And then we just ended by mentioning something to be aware of, this invisible impersonalism that may be prevalent within us. But by default, in Kali Yuga, we should just assume that we're all impersonalists, or we're all tainted with impersonalism, until we really learn to appreciate and manifest our personal philosophy in our dealings. So Hare Krishna, I think we're 1 minute over, but might have time for a question if anyone has, or comment or correction.
Hare Krishna. So I just want to add into one nice point you made. Sometimes we say, hey, you sing nice, you cook nice, you act in the dramas nice, you act in the films nice, but not realizing that ability is coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So sometimes we get the credit, but now we don't give the credit to the Supreme Lord, but we get the credit. So the credit goes to the Supreme Lord, not us.
Yeah, that's an important point. In establishing these relationships with devotees that we want to be personal, and we would naturally glorify their qualities, glorify their service. And yes, the devotees just need to be aware that, when someone's glorifying my service, it's not me that should be glorified. It's, my spiritual master, and who passes on the glories all the way back to Krishna, because Krishna says he's the ability in man. So ultimately, all abilities we have are not ours alone. It's just given to us by Krishna, and the ideal use of it is to engage it in his service. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you for the interesting class. I just want to say that, in Krishna consciousness, we are personalists and we are preaching personalism. But have you noticed that when we go on Zoom meetings, the videos are turned off, the cameras are turned off, and we don't realize that we are impersonal?
Even a Zoom meeting itself is an impersonal thing. Even like a phone call. I don't even like phone calls, to be honest. I find them impersonal. I really like in-person meetings. That's true, and I'm guilty of that. I always have my video off in any online meeting because I just find it weird to have my video on. But that's because of impersonalism, ultimately. So, but we do the best with what we can with the technology and the circumstances and things. Like in COVID, that was the only way to collaborate and communicate and things. Anything else before we close? Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Delayed your breakfast by 5 minutes. Very good.